So, what exactly do you mean when you say, what do you mean?
I do not understand this. This really confuses me.
What's that supposed to mean?
Literally.
What's that supposed to mean?
What's that supposed to mean?
I don't know what you're talking about.
What are you talking about?
What's that supposed to mean?
Cultural anthropologist Ujwal Arkalgud and Motive Base president Jason Partridge will tell you that perception and meaning are the primary pressure points that shape and create the world we live in.
Inconceivable! You keep using that word.
Let's explore why meaning matters.
I don't think it means what you think it means.
Now, here's your host, Aaron Trafford.
Episode 9, feeling the flow. We're feeling good. We're feeling relaxed. We're talking about why meaning matters. And what is so cool for me, I mean, it's just cool that I get to be the host of this show and chat with you guys about these super awesome topics all the time. Stuff that we wouldn't necessarily normally be talking about. That's why I love podcasting. But it's just the connections that we're able to now see in context between things like how we're viewing sleep, how we're viewing our general health, how we're viewing hygiene and self-care. And, you know, everything is connected. So when we talk about sleep, we end up actually talking about cannabis culture and how those two things are now fundamentally linked at a cultural level. And I love that. So we left off the last episode, in case you didn't catch it, talking about sleep, but it became a conversation about the fact that we're not sleeping because a lot of us are in pain, and that the salve to that pain has become, one of the options has become cannabis. And so let's go there. Let's talk about how, is it fair to say cannabis is having a bit of a moment right now, and B, that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we never would have even used the word cannabis, right?
Yeah.
Like this is we're in a whole new frontier.
First of all, I want to acknowledge that I paid attention when you said we're feeling relaxed at the start of this episode, knowing that this is about cannabis.
That's very funny.
Secondly, it's fascinating to us because you're absolutely right. Cannabis is an industry term. Consumers do not walk around going, "Oh, I would like to buy some cannabis." That's not how it works.
Even that's even funny
It's like
when
going
you
to
say
the grocery
it like
store and saying, I'm going to buy some shelf-stable food.
That's
we
right.
don't say that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's right. And so the cultures are different. People talk about marijuana, people talk about weed, people talk about whatever it is. And the cultures that they get placed into are different. Obviously, weed gets placed into recreational culture. Marijuana may be similar. And then there's specific conversations about CBD, which, yes, to the industry's cannabis, but the consumer doesn't call it that. It's about CBD because it's seen, and some combination of THC, because it's seen as a solution for pain, and in particular as a holistic solution for pain, because the consumer is becoming more and more aware of not just of the opioid crisis in America, but also of the general overprescription of painkiller crisis in the US. And because the consumer is so much more aware of that, they're looking for solutions that will have not just the pain relief, but also will help in other things, right? So suddenly, if I find a CBD product that helps me with pain, but also, by the way, helps me with sleep, going back to the previous episode, that's a win-win situation. So that itself is something really, really interesting that is really sort of growing in the mind of the general consumer.
But there's more hurdles here because there still is a cultural hurdle involved with all of this. But I want to kind of come back to the sleep thing first, because I feel like it's more culturally acceptable now to say, well, I have chronic pain XYZ, which is caused by whatever, a disc problem in my back, a bad knee, whatever. So I take CBD oil or I smoke a joint before bed to help me sleep. That's now kind of culturally acceptable versus the kind of dazed and confused version of the weed smoker that we have from the 80s and 90s.
But I think that I mean, I think your point was valid, which is that there was a rebranding that took place where we moved away from weed and reefer and, you know, again, like reefer madness is the past, cannabis is the future. And why is that? And why use a more medical sounding term in order to describe the category? It is to reduce the stigma, right? Again, I think that even as I think towards, you know, groups of people who were very, very engaged in quote unquote weed culture, the way that they discuss breakdowns between, you know, the level of THC in their preferred, you know, kind of solution has increased not only in conversations that they have, but in regards to their knowledge around kind of finding their right level, finding their right dosage, if you will, right? And that's indicative of basically taking something that was blurry from the standpoint of kind of, you know, being something that I take this in order to have this experience to being, I'm looking to better understand the right way within which to ingest this thing so that I can get the experience that I want. And I'm going to science the hell out of this in order to kind of maintain the experience that I want. Now, that is basically linking into elevating myself to having a good time. But to Ujwal's point, that's also starting to find its way into consumers that are looking for new ways within which they can alleviate discomfort. They can alleviate pain. They can find different ways within which to kind of use something that A, is more accessible than it's ever been, but B, that is doing in their mind less damage than those other things that used to be on the table for them. So it's exciting because it really does start to present a really interesting place where something that has been so associated with, again, Matthew McConaughey, all right, now is basically being associated with, you know, my mother's friend who is really kind of figuring out a way to deal with her arthritis. And that is a really interesting kind of collision of culture that I think, to your point, Aaron, is unlike anything I've seen in the last 20 years.
It's fascinating because even in just hearing you describe it that way and so succinctly is that it's become part of self-care. It's become one of those statuses where symbols, social capital, you know, we've been talking about that this whole time. I take vitamins in the morning. I take my CBD oil. I put hyaluronic acid on my wrinkles. Like that's what it is now. It's part of our supplement self-care routine. It is.
And there's, you know, we also started this episode by talking about how one thing connects to another thing. And there are two connections in particular. One is this connection to inflammation. So it's not just about pain. The consumer is connecting cannabis to inflammation. And inflammation also connects, by the way, to a whole other universe of food and food culture. Inflammation also connects to a whole other universe of supplement and supplement culture and probiotics and all of that other stuff. So suddenly you're finding cannabis, if you imagine a Venn diagram, intersects with supplements, it intersects with food, intersects with health, pain, very interesting. And now you suddenly see the world differently. And when you see the world differently, you start to see how consumers are getting smarter about the types of questions they're asking. So let me give you one example. Connection to supplements. So consumers are suddenly asking questions like, oh, if I'm taking certain amounts of multivitamins, let's say every morning, and let's say every evening I microdose or dose in whatever form for pain or whatever reason, are the two interacting with one another? Could one have a negative impact on the other? Now, this was something that in the past nobody would have even considered. And now suddenly, not only are consumers asking these questions, there's also new research emerging that actually that there may be a possibility of the fact that one thing affects the other. And then that poses some interesting questions, right? So if you're a cannabis company, you may have to think about how to get into the supplement business because those Venn diagrams are getting more and more intertwined with each other. And then on the other hand, if you're a supplement company, you have to think about how to get into the world of cannabis because those Venn diagrams are getting more and more intertwined. So to me, that's the fascinating part about this movement.
And overall, would you say it also ties into like that whole concept of all of a sudden it's okay to, I want to use the word indulge, and I don't know if that's the right word or not, but like indulge in cannabis use as a solution just for my overall health. Like back to the sleep thing. If we're looking at being able to improve my sleep over the long term and not just tonight and tomorrow, this is now part of that conversation too, right?
It is. And, Jason had brought up, I think it was in the last episode, this notion of deservedness.
Yeah.
Right? And we see this a lot in different industries. And I think this is also, thinking like an anthropologist, this is also a deeply American problem. Americans believe that they do not deserve to relax, right? That's why they don't take vacations. That's why they work all the time. It's nonstop. You compare them to the average European. Europeans take a lot of time to relax. And that also plays into this, right? Because cannabis is potentially saying, it's okay, you deserve it. Just relax tonight, right? And I think there's something fascinating about that. And again, this is not happening in isolation. It's also happening with changes in the culture of work, future of work, where we're saying we need to relax. So I think there's a lot of things that are interconnected with cannabis. It's not an isolated culture.
I also, and again, if I think about how this is going to impact the alcohol industry. I don't know if you remember the movie Traffic with Michael Douglas and kind of the whole kind of one of the most famous quotes, which I'm going to totally butcher here, is, they were talking about how he's the drug czar. And meanwhile, his wife says, yeah, but then you get home at night and you have, 6 glasses of scotch to put yourself to sleep. Right. And the impact and the role of alcohol and how it's played in this kind of this ongoing kind of question about, are you having 2 drinks a week? Are you having 5 drinks a week? Are you having 20 drinks a week? Now, all of a sudden, there's this kind of, question that begets with is like, is there ways within which I can basically kind of de-stress using this new application, this new source? Can I use cannabis in order to better maintain and get some of the kind of the reprieve that maybe I've been using other substances for? Now, you combine that with this idea that, here is something that can be more moderated depending on how I'm taking it. I can start to science my dosage. I can think of it more as a medicinal element that helps me basically kind of maintain less stress, as opposed to these other things that I feel are kind of a little bit harder to control. So, even that, as it plays out as being something that makes me think a little bit about my health and wellness, I still deserve to get that little bit of a buzz that I want, but at the same time, maybe I'm better to control this in order to reduce kind of the damage that I'm doing to myself over the long term.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and for the record, I will never science my wine dosage.
I was going to say, even the concept, I'm going to science my dosage. There's so much more here. Maybe we should do a whole show about how, the alcohol industry and how this is all impacting that as well. I think there's another universe there to unpack, right?
100%.
That's right. Yeah,
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, this has been Why Meaning Matters, talking about cannabis in a very relaxed format. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Make sure you head over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating, and drop us an email if you have comments or questions. hello@storystudionetwork.com, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Why Meaning Matters with Ujwal Arkulgud, Jason Partridge, and your host, Aaron Trafford.
Inconceivable! You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Why Meaning Matters is produced for Motive Base and the Story Studio Network by Eye Contact Productions.